The changes in Steve weren't just fleeting moments of distraction, they became habits I couldn't ignore. He stopped asking about my day, something he'd done religiously since the day we met. His responses to my questions grew curt, almost dismissive, and the warmth that had once defined our relationship seemed to evaporate with each passing week. It wasn't just his indifference. Steve's words began to cut in ways I hadn't thought him capable of. "Do you ever think about dressing up a bit more, Becky?" he asked one evening as we were getting ready for dinner at home. "Alice always looks so put together, even when she's just running errands." The comment hit me like a slap. I'd always thought Steve appreciated my laid-back style, the comfort we found in our shared casualness. But now, it felt like my simplicity was being weighed against someone else's sparkle, and I was coming up short. At first, I tried harder. I bought a new dress, styled my hair differently, even experimented with makeup, something I'd never cared much for before. But no matter what I did, it never seemed to be enough. Steve would glance at me and nod absently, his eyes distant, as though his thoughts were elsewhere. Likely next door. Our arguments became more frequent. "Why are you always so critical lately?" I asked him one evening after he'd made a pointed remark about the dinner I'd cooked. "I'm not being critical," he replied, his tone defensive. "I'm just saying, Alice makes this lasagna, and it's incredible. Maybe you could ask her for the recipe." I stared at him, disbelief and anger coursing through me. Steve had always loved my cooking. Or at least, he'd pretended to. Now, it seemed even that was another thing Alice could do better. I tried to talk to him about the growing distance between us. One night, I gathered all my courage and said, "Steve, I feel like we're drifting apart. I miss us." He sighed, rubbing his temples as though my words were a burden. "Becky, you're overthinking things. Work has been stressful, and," he hesitated, his eyes flickering toward the window that overlooked Alice's flat. "Maybe we just need some space." Space. The word echoed in my mind, heavy and foreboding. We'd never needed space before. We had always been a team, weathering life's storms together. But now, it felt like I was standing in a downpour, and Steve had abandoned the umbrella. The comparisons didn't stop. If Alice was good at something, Steve made sure I knew about it. "Alice said this book is amazing. Maybe you should read it," or "Alice's flat is so neat, you wouldn't believe how organized she is." Each comment felt like a small knife, chipping away at my confidence and leaving me questioning everything I'd ever thought about myself. I began to withdraw. The Becky who once filled our home with laughter and light grew quieter, her smiles forced and fleeting. I stopped trying to compete with Alice, realizing it was a battle I couldn't win. Instead, I focused on observing, trying to understand how we'd gotten to this point. Was it something I'd done? Or was it someone else? The more I watched Steve, the more I felt like I was staring at a stranger. His gestures, his words, even the way he carried himself, everything seemed different. He wasn't the man I'd fallen in love with in that tiny bookstore on Kensington High Street. And yet, despite the hurt, a small part of me clung to the hope that the Steve I knew was still there, buried beneath whatever had changed him. I didn't know if I could reach him. But I knew one thing for certain, I wasn't ready to give up, not yet.